The arrow hit the tax collector's ledger book dead center, pinning it to the dock post from 15 yards out, and the cove went silent. Charles Dalton lowered his bow, his jaw set, his eyes steady on the 4 armed men who had just shoved Vola Frostwolf hard enough to crack her shoulder into the stone arch of the cave entrance. He had not planned to do that. He had not planned to do much of anything that morning, except finish fletching the last dozen bolts for Merchant Ardine's order before the tide came in. But he had looked up from his workbench at the mouth of his cave, seen the ledger swinging wide to slap her across the face, and his hands had moved before his mind had voted on the matter. "Next one," Charles said, his voice flat and unhurried, "goes through the leather, not the book." Overseer Manton Rook held up one hand, the other pressed against his chest where his heart was likely doing something unpleasant. He was a heavy-set man with a waxed beard, and a uniform that cost more than most fishermen in the cove earned in a year. Behind him, his 4 collectors, each armed with short sword and cudgel, had their hands on their hilts but their feet fixed to the dock planks, because the man with the bow had already proved he could put a shaft through something small and specific from a distance that made them nervous. "That was a mistake," Rook said, and his voice had recovered its oily steadiness faster than Charles would have expected. "A significant mistake, Bowyer." "Fletcher," Charles corrected. "I make the arrows. I just happen to own a bow." Vola Frostwolf straightened from the stone arch, and Charles caught her in his peripheral vision and immediately understood why Rook's men had been rough with her. She was not a woman who invited roughness and survived it for long. She was tall for an orc woman, just past 6 feet, with the broad shoulders and lean muscle of someone who had spent years doing genuinely hard things in genuinely hard places. Her skin was a deep gray-green, weathered to a polish along her cheekbones and the backs of her hands, and her tusks curved upward from her lower lip in 2 elegant ivory arcs that she had not bothered to file or band the way some orc merchants did, when they wanted to look less threatening in human ports. She wore a fitted leather bodice dyed a deep storm blue over a long-sleeved shirt of charcoal linen, the bodice laced tight across her ribs and flaring at the hip, and her travel leathers below were the same storm blue, stitched with faint silver thread along the outer seam in a pattern Charles had not looked at closely enough yet to understand. Her dark hair was pulled back in a warrior's knot secured with a bone pin, and her gray eyes, the particular gray of deep water before a squall, were fixed on Rook, with an expression that was not angry so much as the thing that comes after anger has been refined into something sharper and more patient. "He is under my protection," she said. That was not what Charles expected her to say. He expected her to say something about the ledger, about the tax demand, about the 18 silver crowns Rook had presented as a quarterly levy on any non-human trader operating in the Kestrel Cove, a levy that had been invented 3 months ago by Rook himself and had no backing from the coastal authority at Somervane. Charles had heard her arguing that exact point before the ledger was swung at her. Rook's eyebrows climbed. "I beg your pardon." "The Fletcher," Vola said, nodding once toward Charles without taking her eyes off Rook. "He is under my protection. If you intend to manufacture a grievance about an arrow, you will be manufacturing it against Clan Frostwolf." There was a particular silence after certain names were spoken in the border territories. Clan Frostwolf produced it reliably, the same way a cold wind from the north made lantern flames duck. Rook smiled, and it did not reach his eyes. "Clan Frostwolf has no standing in a human port." "Clan Frostwolf has 7 warskiffs currently anchored in the cove for resupply," Vola said pleasantly. "Would you like me to count them for you? I believe you passed them on your way in." Rook looked at his collectors. One of them gave a small, unhappy nod. Rook smoothed his jacket, retrieved his ledger from the dock post with a deliberate show of calm, and tucked it under his arm. "This matter is not finished," he said. "Very few matters worth having are," Vola agreed, and waited motionless, until Rook and his men had walked back up the cliff-cut steps and disappeared over the headland. Then she let out a long breath, pressed 2 fingers to the tender spot on her jaw where the ledger had caught her, and turned to look at Charles Dalton with an expression he could not immediately read. He was still holding the bow, the string slack now. He was a lean man, 31 years old, with dark hair that needed cutting and hands that were permanently ink-stained and calloused, in the specific pattern of someone who spent their days gripping fletching tools and drawing bowstrings for measurement. His face was angular and weathered, not handsome in any way that poets bothered writing about, but the kind of face that became interesting the longer you looked at it, because it was honest and nothing about it was performing anything. He was wearing a leather apron over a loose shirt, and the shirt was the color of storm blue and silver. Vola looked at the shirt. Then she looked at his face. Then she looked at the shirt again. "Where?" she said, her voice doing something strange and careful. "Did you get that?" Charles glanced down. "Second hand from the market in Gull Notch. The woman selling it said the previous owner owed her money and had sailed without paying. I thought the color was nice." He paused. "It was cheap." Vola's gray eyes traveled the shirt very slowly, taking in the storm blue dye and the small silver stitching along the collar, the particular knotwork along the cuffs. Her jaw was doing something complicated. "Those are Frostwolf colors," she said. "That is Frostwolf stitching." "Oh," said Charles. "The knot at the cuff," she said, "is the clan mark of a pledged mate." The dock was very quiet. Somewhere in the cove below, a gull called twice and was answered. "I," said Charles, "genuinely did not know that." Vola walked toward him, and he held his ground because he was not particularly afraid of her, which was either brave or foolish, and he had always had trouble telling the two apart. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the faint silver flecks in her gray irises, and she reached out and turned the cuff of his sleeve over in her large, warm hand, examining the stitching with a focused attention that made Charles feel oddly seen, like something was being read off him that he had not known was written there. "Someone sold you this," she said slowly, "or someone placed it where you would find it. Is there a difference?" She looked up at him. There was something in her expression that was not the controlled warrior's mask she had worn facing down Rook. It was unsettled and uncertain, and the combination of those two things on a face that had been magnificently composed a moment before made Charles's chest do something unsteady. "In Frostwolf custom," she said, "a clan mark on the mate knot is a formal pledge. It means the wearer has been chosen. It means a match has been declared." She paused. "It means that whoever put those clothes where you would find them has used our custom to make a claim on your behalf." "On my behalf," he repeated, "meaning someone pledged me to you." "To me," she said. "Yes." He sat down on the edge of the workbench behind him without meaning to, because his knees had made a unilateral decision about where they stood on the matter. He was not a man given to dramatic collapses, but something about the gray eyes and the warm hand on his cuff, and the absolute strangeness of the last 5 minutes, had briefly disconnected him from the part of himself that usually managed dignity. Vola watched him sit down, and the unsettled thing in her expression shifted toward something that, on another face, he might have called amusement. On her face it looked warmer and more private than amusement. "You did not do this," she said. "It was not a question." "I bought a second-hand shirt," he said. "I genuinely thought it was a nice color." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him on the workbench with his bow across his knees and his leather apron and his honest, angular face. Then she reached up and pressed her fingers briefly to her jaw again, where Rook's ledger had left a red mark that was going to purple by morning. "You shot the ledger out of his hand," she said. "He hit you with it." "He hit me with it," she agreed, watching him. "You could have stayed at your bench. I don't do well with watching that sort of thing." "No," she said softly, and something in the soft of it was different from everything that had come before it. "You do not seem like someone who does." Charles looked at the shirt cuff, where her fingers had released the stitching. The silver knotwork was delicate and precise, the kind of needlework that took patience and intention. Someone had wanted it found. He thought about who in Gull Notch would own a pledging shirt from Clan Frostwolf and what they would want from engineering this particular complication, and the answer that rose in his mind was not comfortable. "The woman who sold it to me," he said slowly. "She knew your name. She mentioned the Frostwolf skiffs. I thought she was just making conversation." Vola's eyes sharpened. "Describe her." "Older, maybe 50, missing 2 fingers on the right hand, accent like she was from somewhere east of the Thornwall." "Grandmother Setti," Vola said, and the name carried a weight of exasperation so familiar and layered it was practically a country unto itself. "She is from your clan." "She is the clan's senior matchmaker," Vola said. "She has been attempting to arrange a pledging for me for 4 years. I have refused every candidate she has presented." She paused. "Apparently she has changed her strategy to putting a pledging shirt on a stranger so you'd be legally or customarily committed to him without either of you having a say." "The custom requires consent," Vola said quickly, and something in the quickness of it felt important. "It is not binding unless both parties acknowledge it willingly. She cannot force this." She stopped. "But it is seen. It has been set in motion. The rest of the warband will know by evening that a mate-marked shirt has been found. There will be expectations." Charles turned the cuff in his own hand, looking at the stitching. He was a man who worked with fine, precise things, the spine of an arrow shaft, the angle of a fletching vein, the tension of a bow string, and he understood that certain things, once set in motion, had a particular direction to them that was not easy to reverse without damage. "What do you want to do?" he asked her. She looked at him for a long moment, and the gray eyes were working through something. "What do you know about me?" "You're the trade liaison for Clan Frostwolf. You've been bringing your clan's goods through Kestrel Cove for 3 seasons. You're a better negotiator than anyone Rook has fielded against you, including himself. You walk like you know exactly how much room your body takes up in the world, and you've decided you're entitled to all of it." He considered. "You took a ledger across the jaw and didn't flinch." She blinked. It was a very small blink, but it landed like something surprising had gotten through a guard she had not known she was keeping up. "You have been watching me. You come through the cove twice a month. My workshop is at the entrance. I watch everyone. But you remember what you see when it comes to me," she said. He did not answer that, because it was the kind of accurate statement that did not need embellishment. Vola looked at the cave entrance behind him, at the long workbench hung with half-finished shafts and bundles of goose feathers, and the ordered rows of completed arrows in their racks, the small lantern burning against the cave wall, and the smell of cedar and pine resin and beeswax that characterized everything Charles Dalton touched. She looked at the bow, a long recurve of layered wood and horn that was a quietly beautiful object, and at the arrow he had pulled from the ledger, which was straight as a prayer. "Rook will be back," she said. "His levy is a fiction, but the man behind it is not Rook. Rook is a collector. The man behind it is Warlord Grevin, who controls the cliff road and wants to control the cove." "I know," Charles said. "You know. I have been here 4 years. I have watched him take the chandler's shop, the south berth, and the salt store. He is going to take the cove lanes next, and after that there is nothing left between him and the caves." He looked at her. "My workshop is in the caves." "He will want your arrows," Vola said, and it was not a guess. "A fletcher who makes the truest bolts on the border is a military resource." "I know that too." He stood up from the workbench. "Which is why I have been very carefully making sure that the arrows I sell to merchants loyal to Grevin fly about 4% less true than the ones I sell to everyone else. Just enough to matter in a volley, not enough to be provable." Vola stared at him. "It is a very small adjustment to the fletching angle," he said modestly. She laughed. It was a sudden, genuine laugh, surprised out of her, and it transformed her face into something so warm and unguarded that Charles felt something shift in his chest, as though a stone he had not known was there had been moved aside. "You have been sabotaging a warlord with defective arrowheads," she said. "Technically defective fletching. The arrowheads are fine. For how long? 6 months. And he has not noticed. He thinks his archers are undertrained. I may have mentioned it to him in passing." She laughed again, and this time it was longer and lower, and she put her hand over her mouth in a gesture that suggested she did not usually let herself sound delighted, and was surprised to find herself doing it now. Charles felt that shift in his chest become more pronounced. He realized with a particular clarity that hit him between the eyes like a well-aimed shaft, in serious trouble. "Fletcher Charles Dalton," she said, pulling her hand from her mouth and looking at him with her gray eyes warm with amusement and with something else underneath the amusement, something evaluating and intent. "Yes, I think we need to talk about Rook and Greven and what is being done to this cove," she said. "And then I think we need to talk about the shirt. In that order." She glanced at the mate knot on his cuff. "Yes," she said, "in that order. Because the second conversation may be easier once I know what kind of man you are in the first one." Charles picked up the arrow from the dock post, checked the shaft for damage, and set it back in his quiver. "Come inside," he said. "I'll put water on." She followed him into the cave. The interior of Charles's workshop was a single long room carved by the sea into the cliff face over centuries, and finished by Charles over 4 years with a workbench, a hearth, 2 chairs, a cot behind a hanging partition, and enough storage for his materials that the place had a dense, purposeful feeling despite its rough walls. Lanterns hung from iron pegs. The smell was cedar and resin, and the constant low salt of the sea coming up through the cave mouth. Outside, the cove opened in a natural harbor shaped like a cupped hand, the cliff walls rising on 3 sides, the open water to the south. 7 warskiffs were indeed anchored at the far berths, their banners the gray and blue-silver of Clan Frostwolf, and the cove's usual population of fishing boats and small trade vessels gave them a respectful berth. Vola sat in one of the 2 chairs, the larger one, which fit her better, and set her forearms on her knees and looked at Charles while he put water on the iron hook over the hearth. "Greven has been at this for 2 years, she began. "He started in Somervane, buying influence with the coastal authority. 3 of the 5 port adjudicators now report to him. Which means any appeal against Rook's invented levies goes nowhere, because the men who would hear the appeal are on Greven's purse." "I know about the adjudicators," Charles said. "What I don't know is why Frostwolf is fighting him. Your warskiffs are not trading vessels. 7 armed skiffs is a war band, not a merchant convoy." Vola was quiet for a moment. "Clan Frostwolf has traded through Kestrel Cove for 3 generations. It is one of 2 coves on this coast where our ships can resupply without being turned away by the port authority. If Greven takes it, we lose our last reliable coastal access. That matters to us strategically. It also matters to us as a matter of honor. We do not abandon routes we have maintained for a generation." "And the Frostwolf matriarch sent her trade liaison with 7 warskiffs to manage the problem," Charles said. "The Frostwolf matriarch sent me," Vola said carefully. "The skiffs came because I asked for them." She looked at her hands. "I have been managing this negotiation for 3 seasons. I would prefer to resolve it without a battle in the cove. Battles in coves are bad for everyone." "They are terrible for caves full of arrow-making equipment," Charles agreed. "So we agree on that." She looked up at him. "Rook is the immediate problem. Greven is the enduring one. To unseat Rook, I need evidence that his levies are fraudulent, which I have. I have written documentation that the Coastal Authority statute his levy claims to reference was repealed 14 years ago. But to present that evidence to the remaining honest adjudicators, I need someone to carry it to Somervane by the Cliff Road in the next 6 days, before Rook files his quarterly report and formally seizes the South Berth on his pretended authority. And Greven controls the Cliff Road." "And Greven controls the Cliff Road," she confirmed. "He has a checkpoint at the Vane Narrows. Any Frostwolf ship, any Orc messenger, is searched and the documents confiscated." Charles poured the hot water into 2 clay cups with dried herbs. He brought one to her and stood by the hearth with the other, thinking. "You need a human courier." "I need," she said precisely, "a human courier who is trusted in Somervane, who knows the Cliff Road well enough to use the cave routes that bypass the checkpoint, who is not on Greven's list of known opponents, and who can make the journey in 6 days." He looked at her. "You have been coming through this cove for 3 seasons, and you are asking me." "You make arrows," she said, and there was something in her voice that was careful. "Merchants need arrows. You travel to Summervane for materials twice a year. You are on no one's political list because no one has thought to put you on one. You know these cliffs the way I know my ship." She paused. "And you shot a ledger out of a man's hand to keep one from striking me. I trust the instincts of people who move before they think when what they move toward is protecting something." He drank from his cup. She drank from hers, watching him over the rim. "I will take your documents," he said, "but I want something from you in return." Her eyes were steady. "Name it." "The warband, while I am gone. 7 armed skiffs can hold the cove entrance against anything Rook can muster from inland. I need the south berth and the cave approaches held so that when I come back, there is still a cove to come back to." She looked at him for a moment with that evaluating intensity. "You are asking me to declare open defense of Kestrel Cove in exchange for your courier service. I am asking you to do what you were going to do anyway, and to do it while I am gone, so there is a reason for me to hurry back." He held her gaze. "Deal." She set down her cup. She held out her hand, and he took it, and the grip was firm and dry and warm and considerably stronger than his, and lasted a beat longer than a business handshake before she let go. "Deal," said Vola Frostwolf. He left the next morning before light, with her documents in a waterproof oilskin case inside his arrow bag, tucked between practice shafts. He wore the storm blue shirt. He told himself it was because it was the warmest shirt he owned, and the cliff road was cold at altitude. He was mostly honest with himself about most things, but this was a small exception he allowed. The cliff road north from Kestrel Cove was exactly as difficult as its reputation promised. It rose from the cove mouth in a series of switchbacks cut into the rock face, gaining 500 feet of elevation in the first 2 miles before leveling onto a wind-scoured plateau that ran north for 7 miles, and then dropped again to the lower headland above Summervane. In good weather with a strong horse, a man could make it in a day and a half. Charles did not have a horse. He had a mule named Practical, who was reliable in ways that romantic animals were not, and he had his knowledge of the small cave systems that networked the cliffs like the capillaries of a massive stone body, passages the locals had used for 200 years for fishing, smuggling, and general avoidance of authority. The checkpoint at the Vane Narrows was exactly where he expected it. 3 men with Greven's red and black livery, manning a barrier of crossed spears across the road, where the path squeezed between 2 outcroppings to a width of 8 feet. Charles stopped Practical a quarter mile out, tied her to a scrub pine, took his arrow bag, and climbed the switchback that led up to the cave mouth he had used twice before to bypass this exact section of road. The cave ran inland for 40 yards and then dropped through a series of ledges to emerge on the far north side of the checkpoint. He had to crawl the last section, which did nothing for the dignity, but it was far preferable to having Vola's documents confiscated. He emerged on the far side, dusted limestone from his shirt, returned to Practical by the long way around the west slope, and was back on the main road before the checkpoint men had finished their lunch. He made Summervane in 2 days. The city sat at the mouth of its own cove, larger and more formal than Kestrel, with a proper harbor wall and a market district, and the stone-faced buildings of the coastal authority lining the upper esplanade. Charles had been here for materials a dozen times, and knew it the way a careful man learns places he needs to navigate. The streets that led to the adjudicator's office, the inn where a respectable merchant might stay without attracting notice, the face of adjudicator Hallen Sears, who was known to be the least corrupted of the 3 honest ones, and who would remember him vaguely from a previous deposition about a stolen shipment of arrow stock. He presented himself at Sears's office on the afternoon of the 2nd day, and Sears was a white-haired man with the deliberate manner of someone who had spent 40 years reading documents for lies and had become very good at it. He read Vola's documents for a long time without speaking. "This is correct," Sears said at last. "Statute 47 was repealed. This levy has no legal basis." "I know," Charles said. Rook is going to file against the Kestrel South berth in 6 days, Sears said. If I issue a counterorder today, it will reach Rook in 4. But, Charles said, because Sears's face had the look of a man walking up to a butt. But the other 2 honest adjudicators are in the South Chamber this week. If I issue a loan, Greven's men on the council can override on procedural grounds. I need both of them to co-sign, which means I need 2 more days to convene a joint session. That is 6 days total, Charles said. Yes. And Rook files at the end of 6. Yes. Charles looked at the ceiling. If the South berth filing is delayed by even a day, Greven's claim lapses under Cove law and Rook cannot refile until the next quarter, which is 3 months away. Sears folded his hands. Get me a 2-day delay on the filing and I can fix the rest. How does a Fletcher delay a tax filing? Sears looked at him over his folded hands. That, he said, is outside my area of expertise. Charles rode Practical back to Kestrel Cove in a day and a half, which Practical registered as an injustice but endured. He arrived at dusk of the 4th day, and the cove looked different than when he had left it. The 7 Frostwolf warskiffs had moved from the far berths to the cove mouth, forming a loose line that made the entry narrow for anything larger than a fishing boat, and he could see figures on the dock in the falling light, and a sound carried across the water that was not the usual evening noise of the cove. He tied Practical at the headland post and came down the cliff steps quickly. Vola was on the central dock, and she was arguing with Rook. She was not alone. 2 of the Frostwolf warskiff captains stood behind her, large, scarred orc warriors in belted leathers, and 4 of Rook's collectors faced them from the dock end, plus Rook himself, who had acquired reinforcements in the form of 6 men in Greven's livery that Charles had not seen before. They were standing around a document that Rook was holding up and pointing at. Charles came down the last of the cliff steps onto the dock and every head turned, and then Vola's gray eyes found him, and something in them shifted in a way that made his ribs feel tight, like relief and something else combined had arrived faster than they were prepared for. He is here, she said, not loudly, but in the tone of someone announcing an argument-tending fact. Mr. Dalton, Rook said, and his voice had a new edge that Charles did not like, the edge of a man who had received instructions from above. You have made a journey. I make several journeys a year. I am a Fletcher. I need materials. You made a particular journey in particular company, Rook said, and one of the Greven soldiers moved to block the dock end, and Charles understood suddenly that they had been watching for his return and had known what he was carrying. I travel alone, Charles said. Ask Practical, she will tell you. The documents, Rook said. Charles looked at Vola. She looked back at him, and her eyes were calm and reading him the way she had read the mate-knot stitching, quickly and accurately. He shook his head, the smallest possible motion. Her eyes sharpened. Mr. Dalton has no documents of legal relevance, she said, turning to Rook with a composure that was absolute. He is a Fletcher. He carries arrows and fletching materials. You are welcome to search his pack. I believe we will, Rook said. Charles swung his arrow bag from his shoulder and held it out. The document case was not in it. He had transferred it to a place it was very unlikely to be found, sitting beneath his leather apron, tucked flat against his back in the gap below his shoulder blades where the apron straps crossed. He had made this decision during the last half-mile, when he had seen the soldiers on the dock and understood what was happening. The arrow bag held arrows and fletching materials, and a pair of calipers and a small whetstone, all of which were exactly what a Fletcher carried. Rook's man searched it item by item and found nothing. Rook's smile was thin. For now, he said, and walked off the dock with his soldiers, and the collectors followed, and the silence after their departure was long and specific. Vola crossed the dock in 4 strides and put her hand briefly on Charles's arm, a grip that was firm and warm and told him several things without words. Then she leaned close, and he felt her breath by his ear, and she said very quietly, "Tell me about Summervane." He told her. The walk back to the cave workshop was short, and they moved quickly, and he laid out what Sears needed, the 2-day delay, and Vola listened without interrupting, which was how he had learned she operated when the information mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for 10 steps. "He will file at the harbor office," she said. "It is the only office in the cove with a notary stamp. If there is no notary available to witness the filing, it cannot be completed." "There is one notary in the cove," Charles said. "Merchant Felda Wren. She runs the chandler's shop on the East Lane." "She does not like Rook," Vola said. "I know her from 3 seasons of trading." "She does not like Greven either. He took her best storage shed 2 years ago and paid her half of what it was worth." Charles glanced sideways. "But she is one woman. Rook will compel her." "He will try," Vola said. "It is harder to compel someone who is temporarily unavailable." Charles looked at her. The lantern from the cave mouth caught the side of her face, and the evening made her eyes look more silver than gray. "You want to get her out of the cove for 2 days." "I want her to take a short sea voyage," Vola said, "at the invitation of Clan Frostwolf. A genuine commercial invitation. We are in genuine need of a notary for the transfer of a shipping bond at our main anchorage, which is 2 days' sail." She smiled, and it was a particular smile, the one he had started cataloging without meaning to. "This is all entirely legitimate. Rook will find another notary." "The nearest other notary is at Gull Notch," she said. 3 days by road, and that road goes through the checkpoint at Vane Narrows, and his own soldiers will delay him long enough out of bureaucratic incompetence if I send the right word ahead." She paused. "I have resources. I am the trade liaison for Clan Frostwolf. Bureaucratic incompetence is one of the services we provide to our friends." Charles laughed, and this time it was his turn to be surprised by it. A full laugh that bounced off the cave walls when they entered. Vola looked at him laughing and did that thing again with her mouth, the pressing of her hand against it, and then she did not press it and she smiled at him with her tusks and her gray eyes and her whole honest face, and Charles sat down on the workbench again, not from shock this time but because the warmth in that smile was so unexpected and so direct that it rearranged something in the center of him. "Fletcher," she said. "Yes. You are a remarkably useful man." "The shirt," he said, because there was a moment before he lost the nerve. "We said we would talk about it." The smile stayed but changed. "So we did." He turned up the cuff. The knotwork caught the lantern light and glowed. "You said the custom requires consent, that it is not binding unless both parties acknowledge it willingly." "That is correct. So it can be declined by you or by me or by both of us." "Yes," she said quietly. "It can be." He looked at the stitching. The thread was silver against storm blue, the knot precise and elegant and deliberate. He had worn it for 4 days on a hard road, and it had not chafed and it had not faded. "I do not want to decline it," he said. He said it to the cuff, because some things are easier to say to an object than to a face. "But I am aware that I am a human man of no particular standing who makes arrows in a cave, and you are the trade liaison for a major orc clan, and you have gray eyes like deep water, and you could have any candidate your matchmaker presented. And I have no idea why your matchmaker put a pledging shirt in a second-hand market stall where I would buy it, but—" he stopped. "But I did not want to decline it without at least saying that." The cave was quiet. Outside, the sea moved against the rock in its patient rhythm. "Look at me," said Vola. He looked up. She was standing close, closer than she had been a moment ago, and her expression was the most unguarded he had seen on her, which given what he had already seen felt significant. "Grandmother Setti put that shirt where you would find it because she has watched me come through this cove for 3 seasons, Vola said. "And she has watched the way I look at the cave mouth when I come in from the water, and she is, despite everything, a very perceptive woman." She held his gaze. "I have refused every candidate she presented because none of them were you." Charles Dalton did not speak, because some things demand a moment of being heard without response. "You are not of no standing," she continued. "You are the man who makes the truest arrows on the border, who has been quietly defying a warlord with 4% of fletching angle for 6 months, who shot a ledger out of a man's hand because the man used it to strike me, and who crossed the cliff road alone and crawled through caves with my documents against his back and came out the other side. Her voice was steady and warm. A woman like me does not need a man of high standing. She needs a man of deep character. Those are different things. He stood up from the workbench because he could not stay sitting for this. He was approximately 6 inches shorter than her and considerably less intimidating in every physical dimension, and he did not care in the slightest, because what she had just said to him was the most precise and accurate description of what he had always wanted to be that he had ever heard, and the fact that it was coming from her made it feel like something settling into its right place after a long time moving. "I still want to hear what you want," he said. "Not the custom. Not the matchmaker. You." She reached out and caught the edge of his collar with 2 fingers, lightly, the same deliberate touch she had used on his cuff that morning, reading him. "I want to not be alone in a place I love," she said. "I have been managing this cove and this route for 3 seasons by myself, and I have done it competently, and I have done it without needing any help, but needing and wanting are different things." Her thumb moved across the collar seam. "I want the man who moves before he thinks, when what he is moving toward is protecting something. I want that directed at me, and I want to know that when I come in from the water, there is a light on in the cave." Charles put his hand over hers on his collar, and her fingers were very warm. "There is always a light in the cave," he said. She leaned down and kissed him, or more accurately she tilted her head and pressed her forehead against his first, a gesture he would later learn was an orc greeting of deep intention. And then her mouth found his, and the kiss was unhurried and warm and tasted of the sea herbs from his cup, and of something else that was entirely hers. And her hands moved to his jaw, and he put his hands at her waist over the leather bodice, and the whole thing lasted long enough that the hearth fire had burned lower by the time they stepped back. "The mate knot," she said when she could. Her voice was different now, the careful control of it replaced by something that breathed more freely. "Yes. It is a declaration," she said, "but the formal custom is a mark. A bite given in the claiming at the shoulder, it leaves a scar." She watched him carefully. "I am not asking for that now. That is a thing for when we both know it is what we want. I am asking whether you understand that when I say I want this, I am saying it in the way my people say things, completely." He looked at her. "I say things completely too," he said. "I'm just quieter about it." She smiled again, and this time she did not put her hand over her mouth. "I know," she said. "I have been watching you come and go from this cave for 3 seasons. Watching me," he said, and he was smiling now too. "I come through this cove twice a month," she said serenely. "My ship passes the cave mouth. It is unavoidable. Of course." She pulled him back in by the collar, and the second kiss was considerably less unhurried than the first, and when the hearth fire finally got down to coals, they were sitting together on the larger chair with their shoulders touching, making plans for getting Merchant Felda Wren on a Frostwolf skiff before morning without anyone from Greven's operation noticing. It was an excellent evening. Felda Wren turned out to be a small, iron-gray woman with a genius for logistics and a grudge against Greven that had been accruing interest for 2 years, and when Vola appeared at her back door at midnight and presented the situation in clear terms, Felda packed a bag in 12 minutes flat and was on the skiff in 20. Charles watched from the dock, and Vola came back across the planks with a look of satisfaction that was also, he was learning, her look for a thing executed well. "She is delighted," Vola said. "She calls it a vacation. Good. Rook will come for the harbor office by noon tomorrow, and find it closed and the notary unavailable. And you will have 2 days. "We will have 2 days, she corrected, and looked at him with the gray eyes in the moonlight, and the correction mattered. The next day was a waiting day, which was its own kind of difficult. Rook came at noon as predicted, found the harbor office closed, and spent 2 hours attempting to locate Felda Wren, and then an additional hour attempting to locate the harbor office's deputy, who was hiding in the chandler's storeroom on Vola's very specific suggestion. By evening, Rook had sent a rider for Gull Notch. The rider, Charles learned from a fisherman who used the Cliff Cave network for his own private business, arrived at the Vane Narrows checkpoint and was held there for detailed document examination for most of the first day. The bureaucratic incompetence, as promised, was comprehensive. Charles spent the waiting day at his workbench, because he always worked when he was thinking, and there was a great deal to think about. He made a dozen arrows, which he made perfectly, without the 4% adjustment, because the person he expected to use them did not work for Greven. Vola came and went from the workshop 3 times between managing her warband and sending and receiving coded messages with the skiff captains, and each time she came in, she paused at his workbench for a moment in a way that was not quite touching and not quite not touching, a warmth of proximity that made the arrows harder to finish properly because his hands wanted to be doing something else. On the second morning, Charles heard the sound from the sea road before he saw anything. He was on the clifftop checking the sight line to the checkpoint, which was useful for timing, and the sound was not the hooves of a returning rider but the boots of a large group of men moving quickly, and when he crested the last rise he saw them, 30 soldiers in Greven's colors, moving down the cliff road from the north at a pace that was between a march and a run. This was not in any plan. He was back down the cliff steps in 4 minutes, and Vola met him at the cave mouth because she had her own lookouts, and they had communicated the same information 30 seconds before he arrived. "Greven himself is moving," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hand was on her belt knife and her eyes were towards the cove entrance. "He found out about the counter-order," Charles said. "Sears must have filed early. Greven is moving to physically control the cove before the paperwork reaches Rook. 30 men," she said, "at minimum. The warband is 10 fighters per skiff," she said, 70 against 30. "You do not want to fight in the cove," he said. "No," she said, "I do not want to fight in the cove." She looked at the entrance. "But if Greven reaches the south berth and plants his standard before the counter-order is formally served, he has a claim under martial convention. The paperwork means nothing if the physical possession is established first." Charles thought very fast. He was good at thinking fast when the pieces were physical and spatial, the same part of his mind that computed angles and distances. "The south berth access," he said. "It is accessible from the sea. Can your skiffs physically block it? They are already at the cove mouth. Move 3 of them to the south berth now. Greven's men are on foot. They cannot take a berth that is held by armed ships without attacking from the water, and they have no ships." She looked at him for 2 heartbeats. Then she turned to the nearest of her captains and issued a rapid set of instructions in the Orc tongue, which Charles did not speak but followed partly from context and partly because Vola's hands moved when she commanded, and the gestures were not hard to read. 2 of the captains broke for the docks at a run. "And you," she said, turning back to him. "I need to get to the harbor office and be there when Greven's men arrive. Rook does not know yet that the counter-order has been filed. If Greven's men reach Rook before I do, Rook will seal the harbor office on Greven's authority and it becomes a military operation. But if I can get into the office and formally post the counter-order—" "You have the counter-order." He reached into the arrow bag and produced the oilskin case. He had not shown her that it was still on him. He had never confirmed it was not in the arrow bag when Rook's man searched it. She looked at the case with an expression that was surprised and impressed and also briefly irked. "You have been carrying that the entire time. I thought it was safer if you did not know. If Rook questioned you, I do not break under questioning," she said sharply. "I know. I also know that you cannot not know something you genuinely do not know, and it gave you a genuine reaction when Rook searched the bag." He met her eyes. "I was protecting you." The irk in her expression shifted. "You protect me," she said, and her voice was strange. "When I can. Even from useful knowledge. Even then." She reached out and touched his jaw with 2 fingers, a brief touch, the same deliberate reading she did with fabric and documents. Then she stepped back and her voice went back to the command register. "Go, harbor office. Post it publicly on the door where even Rook cannot take it down without being seen to defy the coastal authority openly. I will hold the berth. There are 30 soldiers," he said, "and there are 7 warskiffs crewed by Clan Frostwolf," she said. "We will be fine. Vola," she stopped. He never used her given name in that tone, and she heard the difference. "Yes," she said quietly. "Don't get hurt." She looked at him for a moment with the gray eyes, and then she smiled, and it was the smile that she had given up pressing her hand over, the full one that transformed her face and let warmth out where it had been carefully stored. "Don't get shot," she said. He ran. The harbor office was at the junction of the two main dock lanes, a low stone building with a locked ironwood door, and a public posting board beside it on which documents of legal standing could be fixed and witnessed. Charles reached it 4 minutes ahead of the sound of boots on the cliff steps, picked the lock with the small tool he kept in his apron pocket for exactly these moments. Because Cove life taught you that this skill was occasionally necessary, and flung the door open, and went through the documents in the case with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. The counterorder was there, signed by all 3 honest adjudicators, dated 2 days ago, formally revoking Rook's authority to levy the South Berth under the statute he had claimed, and further directing that any outstanding levy demands under that authority were void. It was a complete, airtight document, and it was the most beautiful piece of paper Charles had seen in his adult life. He came out of the office at a walk, which was a deliberate choice, because men running look guilty and men walking look purposeful, and nailed the document to the public posting board with 2 of his own iron tacks from the apron pocket, driving them into the old wood with the handle of his penknife. He stepped back and put his hands in his apron pockets, just as the first of Grevin's soldiers came around the lane end. The soldier was a hard-faced man with a sergeant's mark on his collar, and he stopped when he saw the board and the white paper and the tacks, and Charles could see the moment he recognized what it was by the way the man's face moved. "That is a duly posted coastal authority counterorder," Charles said pleasantly, "witnessed by 3 adjudicators and filed 2 days ago. Removing it from that board would be destruction of legal process, which carries a 5-year sentence at the Somervane garrison." He tilted his head. "I am told the garrison is not comfortable this time of year." The sergeant looked at him. He looked at the board. He looked at the 6 men behind him. "I need to consult with Overseer Rook," the sergeant said finally. "Of course," Charles said. "Rook is probably at the South Berth, where he will currently find 7 Frostwolf warskiffs." He smiled. "I would take your time." He walked back toward the cave because the thing was done, and the legs wanted something to do while the hands were steady. The confrontation at the South Berth was shorter than the walk to it, because Vola had positioned her ships with absolute precision, and when Grevin's 30 soldiers arrived at the berth end and saw 7 armed warskiffs crewed by Frostwolf fighters with bows and belted axes, they had a military assessment to make that was fairly simple. Rook was there, and Rook looked at the ships and at his 30 soldiers and at the orc woman standing on the dock with her captains, and he made the assessment quickly and correctly. "Warlord Grevin will not accept this," Rook said. "Warlord Grevin," said Vola, "is welcome to contest a duly filed coastal authority counterorder in front of the adjudicators. I will be present at that hearing. I look forward to it." Rook's jaw worked. He looked past her and saw Charles coming across the dock with his apron and his arrow bag and his honest face, and something in Rook's expression suggested he was revising his understanding of what had happened over the last 6 days. "You," Rook said. "Good morning," Charles said. "You are a fletcher." "I am," Charles agreed. "The truest arrows on the border, some say. I think that might be an exaggeration, but I am proud of the work." Rook looked at Vola. He looked at Charles. He looked at the ships and the document tacked to the board down the lane, and he looked at his 30 soldiers who were standing in the order of men who had concluded that they were doing the wrong math. "Grevin will not be finished," Rook said. "Grevin never is," Vola said. "But for today he is done with this cove." Rook walked. The soldiers followed him, because soldiers follow their orders, and their orders had just become considerably less clear. And 30 men leaving a cove is a long procession that takes time to accomplish. And Charles and Vola watched it go from the dock end with the morning sun burning off the sea mist, and the cove water going from gray to green around the hulls of 7 Frostwolf warskiffs. When the last of them had gone up the cliff steps and over the headland, one of the skiff captains, a massive woman named Dara with a scar across her chin that she wore with satisfaction, let out a sound from the nearest ship that was very loud and very pleased, and the rest of the war band responded in kind, and the noise bounced off the cliff walls and rolled out to sea. Vola stood still through this, and then she turned to Charles, and there were 6 steps between them on the dock, and she crossed them. "We held the cove," she said. "You held the cove," he said. "I filed a document and picked a lock. You crawled through caves with my documents against your back and made a deal with 3 adjudicators and thought of the berth blocking and the harbor office," she said. "Do not minimize the useful things." "Fine. We held the cove." "We held the cove," she agreed, and then she closed the last step between them and she put her hands on his face, which she had to tilt down to reach because of the height difference, and she kissed him on the dock in front of 7 Frostwolf warskiffs and their crews in the morning sun. From the nearest ship, Captain Dara made an entirely different kind of noise, which was considerably more celebratory and personal, and which Vola ignored completely. Charles, for his part, put his hands at Vola's waist and kissed her back without the slightest hesitation, because the moment was exactly as large as it felt, and the thing he had learned in 31 years of making arrows was that the straight line between 2 points was always the true one. When they separated, she was not pressing her hand over her mouth. She was smiling entirely openly at him, and her gray eyes were that particular silver they went when the light was good, and her dark hair was coming loose from the warrior's knot because the morning wind had been at it. And she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life, which, given that he had been looking at her for 3 seasons, was not a new conclusion, but was the first time he had let himself state it directly in the internal register, where the things he actually believed lived. "The mark," she said softly so only he could hear it. He looked at her. "I am not asking now," she said quickly. "I said that, I am not asking now," but her hands were still on his jaw. "I want you to know that I intend to ask, when you are ready, when we have had more time than 6 days in a crisis." "What does the bite feel like?" he asked. She blinked. It was not the response she expected. "It is brief," she said, "and warm. The scar that remains is small on the shoulder." She watched him. "Why?" "I am trying to determine," he said honestly, "how long I am going to ask you to wait." Her eyes went very still and then very warm, that slow process he had been watching since the dock post-morning, the thing that traveled from the controlled surface of her down to the genuine territory underneath. "Not long," she said, and she was doing that thing where her voice was careful. "I think if you asked me in a week," he said, "the answer would be yes. I think if you asked me tomorrow, the answer would probably also be yes. I'm aware that makes me sound incautious." "It makes you sound like a man who knows what he wants," she said. "I am usually better at knowing what I want than at saying it. You have been saying it rather clearly since you knocked an arrow and drew on Rook's ledger." He laughed. She smiled. The sun had fully come up over the headland now, and the cove was green gold and the ships were silver gray against it, and the war band was beginning the ordinary business of a morning after a victory, and it was a fine and good moment. "Come inside," he said. "I will put water on." "You always offer water," she said. "It is what I have." "It is," she said, "exactly enough." She followed him back to the cave. The week that followed was not the quiet settling of a settled matter. Greven, as Rook had promised, was not finished. He could not contest the counterorder openly without committing the kind of legal violation that even his bought adjudicators could not smooth over, but he was a man with other tools, and he used them. On the 3rd day after the standoff, 2 of the fishing boats in the cove were found with cut mooring lines. On the 4th day, a merchant ship bearing supplies for the Frostwolf resupply ran aground on a sandbar that had been unmarked on the current charts. And Charles, who knew these charts, recognized that the bar had been clearly marked 3 months ago, and the marking had been removed from the harbor office copy, which was the copy the merchant would have consulted. On the morning of the 5th day, Charles came out of the cave at dawn to find that someone had been through his workbench. Nothing was missing. Nothing was destroyed. But the arrow racks had been searched. He could tell by the way the shafts sat in their holders, 2 degrees off from how he placed them, and the storage chest had been opened and closed again, and there was a smear of boot mud on the cave floor that was not his mud. He stood at the bench for a long time, turning one of the undisturbed arrows in his hands. Then he went to find Vola. She was on the dockside with Captain Dara, reviewing the supply manifest from the grounded merchant ship, and she read his face before he spoke. "Inside," she said to Dara, and Dara went without comment. In the cave, Charles showed her the boot mud and the moved rack and the chest latch that had been engaged from the wrong side, the little signs that an ordinary person might miss, and that a person who lived in a single room for 4 years and knew every inch of it did not. "He is looking for something specific," Vola said. "The defective arrow stock," Charles said. "If Grevin can prove I have been selling him deliberately faulty arrows, it is breach of contract. He can take the workshop on judgment. Can he prove it? The arrows he has bought are in his armory. If he compares their fletching angle to a standard," Charles stopped. "Yes, he can prove it. It is a small difference, but it is measurable." Vola thought for a moment. He did not find what he came for. "The defective stock is in the secondary cave," Charles said. "The passage in the back wall, most people do not know it exists." "Then he is still looking. He will come back, or he will send someone who knows caves better. Or," Vola said, "he will simply seize the workshop on a different pretense and search it properly." She looked at the boot mud on the floor and then at Charles. "You need to not be here when that happens. This is my workshop." "This is your workshop," she agreed. "And your workshop is at the bottom of a cliff that Grevin controls the top of. If he seizes it, you are a single man against whatever force he brings. The warband can defend the cove mouth, but we cannot be inside your cave for you. You are suggesting I leave." "I am suggesting," she said precisely, "that we both leave. That we take the documents, the secondary stock, anything that can be used against you, and we take it out by sea, and we take the evidence of Grevin's tampering with the harbor charts with us to Somervane, and we add it to the existing case against him, and we bury him completely." Charles looked at the workbench. 4 years of work. The lanterns on the iron pegs. The hearth, the cot behind the partition, the 2 chairs. "The cave will be here when this is finished," Vola said. "Stone does not go anywhere. And if Grevin seizes it while we are gone, then we unseat him formally and it reverts to you, because he will have seized it with fraudulent authority that the counterorder already invalidates." She crossed to the workbench and stood beside him, and he felt the warmth of her at his shoulder. "You cannot fight him from inside a cave at the bottom of his cliff. You fight him from Somervane, with documentation and adjudicators and the full weight of Clan Frostwolf behind you." "The full weight of Clan Frostwolf," he repeated. "Yes," she said, and there was something in the yes that was direct and warm and personal, not diplomatic at all. He looked at the cave. He looked at her. "How long to Somervane by sea?" he asked. "On a Frostwolf skiff, 2 days." He started pulling the most important items from the storage chest. The preparation took the rest of the day, done quietly so as not to announce the departure to anyone watching from the cliff. The defective arrow stock was wrapped in oilskin. The original harbor charts with their accurate sandbar markings, which Charles had kept because he always kept originals, were cased. The workshop was tidied with the deliberate tidiness of someone who intended to return to it. The 2 chairs were left exactly where they were. Before he shuttered the lanterns, Charles picked up one of the perfectly made arrows from the rack, a full-length broadhead with goose feather fletching, and turned it once in his hands. He had made it 2 days ago, the morning after the standoff, while Vola was managing the skiff repositioning, and his hands had needed to do something careful. It was an accurate object. He set it back in the rack precisely and shuttered the last lantern. Vola was waiting at the cave mouth. She had Captain Dara and 4 of the warband with her, carrying the wrapped items down to the dock in the way that looked like ordinary cargo loading if you were watching from the headland, which someone certainly was. "Ready?" she said. He took one last look at the cave. The dark was complete inside it now. The the hearth cold and banked, the lanterns out, and it looked like a cave rather than a place anyone had lived and worked in with intention. It would be a cave again in a week. It was, as she had said, stone. Stone did not go anywhere. Ready, he said. They went down to the skiff. The skiff was the second fastest of the warband fleet, a vessel called the Saltmark, with a narrow hull and 2 masts, and a crew of 10 fighters who moved around it with the economy of people for whom the sea was a working surface, rather than a feature of the landscape. Charles was shown a place at the bow rail, and given the practical advice to stay there unless someone told him to move, which was good advice that he intended to follow. He knew boats in the way of someone who lived beside the sea without being a mariner, which was to say he could tie a knot and read a wind, and not do anything obviously dangerous. But the Saltmark under full sail was a different category of vessel from the fishing boats and trade ships that made up his acquaintance. Vola stood at the stern with the captain, and Charles watched her there across the length of the deck and thought about the mate knot on his cuff, and about what she had said on the dock that morning, about intending to ask. The thought had a solid, settled quality to it, like an arrow properly nocked, ready to fly when the moment was right. The night sea was dark and moved in long swells, and the stars above the mast were sharp and numerous, and the coast was a darker line of black to the east. He was not cold because the storm-blue shirt was indeed the warmest thing he owned, and the sea wind was firm but not brutal, and the Saltmark drove through the swells with a purposeful surge that he found, to his surprise, pleasing. Vola came forward after the first hour, when the skiff's course was set and the captain had the helm. She settled at the bow rail beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched when the boat moved, and for a while neither of them said anything because the sea and the stars were sufficient company and adding words to them would have been unnecessary. "Grandmother Setti," Charles said eventually. Vola made a sound. "Yes. When we reach Summervane, she needs to know." "She will know," Vola said. "She always knows." "Is she going to be difficult about it?" Vola considered. "She will take credit for it," she said. "She will say she engineered the entire thing, which in fairness she partly did. She will be insufferable about it for approximately a month and then she will move on to the next project. She is not sentimental once the work is done. That seems efficient." "She is the most efficient woman alive," Vola said, "and also the most maddening." She was quiet for a moment. "She chose you because she saw me watching you," she said. "She told me later, after the cove. She said she had watched me come in from the water for 3 seasons and look at the cave mouth, and she said she had seen me time the docking to walk past it, and she decided that whatever I was too stubborn to admit I wanted, she was going to arrange it." Charles thought about this. "She sounds formidable. She is 80 years old and still runs 3 active trading relationships and speaks 5 languages, and she picked the lock of my personal correspondence chest to read my route logs," Vola said. "Draw your own conclusion." "She picked the lock," Charles said. "I have changed the lock twice. She picks the new one within a week." He laughed quietly into the sea wind. "I like her." "Everyone likes her," Vola said, with the tone of someone who was very fond of a person they found completely maddening. "It is one of her most annoying qualities." The Saltmark cut south through the dark water and the stars wheeled overhead, and Vola's shoulder was warm against his, and he thought that the particular quality of this moment, the sea, the motion, the woman beside him, the feeling of moving toward something rather than waiting in one place, was something he wanted to remember and return to. He turned to her. "Ask me," he said. She turned to look at him. The dark made her eyes very silver. "Now, you said you intended to ask," he said. "You said when I was ready. I am telling you I am ready." "Charles," she said, and his name and her voice in that tone was something he had not heard before and intended to hear again as many times as circumstances permitted. "I know it has been less than a week," he said. "I know that is not very long, but I have been looking at the cove mouth when you come in for 3 seasons, too, and I just did not know it was that until you said it on the dock." He held her gaze. "Ask me." She reached up and her fingers found his shoulder, the left one, through the storm-blue shirt, and she leaned close, and he felt the brief sharp pressure of her bite, gentle but deliberate and warm, and then the warmth of her breath against the place, and then she pulled back and looked at him with the gray eyes that were entirely open now. No guard, no management, just her. It hurt less than he expected. It ached pleasantly, the way a muscle aches after good work. He could feel the mark already, the raised heat of it under the cloth. "You are mine," she said. "I am yours." She paused. "That is the full form of it, both directions." "Both directions," he agreed. "Yes." She kissed him again, at the bow of the salt mark with the sea under them and the stars above, and the coast of everything they were leaving, and everything they were going toward, a line of dark in the east. And this kiss was different from the dock one and different from the cave one. Not in intensity, but in character. The character of a thing that has moved from intent to fact. When they came apart, she rested her forehead against his, and he understood the gesture now for what it was, an orc expression of deep presence. "I am here and you are here, and those two facts are not separate," and he leaned into it. "The workshop," he said. "We'll be there," she said. "And after Summervane." "After Summervane," she said. "We bury Grevin properly, and we sail back to the cove, and we reopen the workshop, and I redirect the Frostwolf supply route so that the resupply stop is at Kestrel Cove instead of Gull Notch, which it should have been 2 years ago." She paused. "And I apply to the matriarch for a permanent posting as Cove liaison rather than a rotating appointment." "Permanent," he said. "I want the light in the cave to be mine to come back to," she said. "Not something I pass twice a month." "It is yours," he said. "It has been yours for 3 seasons. I just did not know you knew." She made a soft sound. "I knew. And you still came only twice a month." "I was being restrained," she said with dignity. He laughed, and she felt it against her forehead, and she made the sound again, lower and warmer, and the sea moved under them and the stars burned, and the salt mark drove south towards Summervane with its 2 important passengers and the rest of the night ahead of it. They reached Summervane at mid-morning of the 2nd day, and adjudicator Sears, who was a man who had been waiting for the other half of a very large legal problem to arrive, received them in his office with the expression of someone who had not been entirely sure the other half was coming. The session took 3 days. Charles presented the harbor chart evidence, the original charts with the sandbar markings intact, the current harbor office copy with the markings removed, and his own written testimony that the removal had been discovered 3 days after the Kestrel Cove standoff. Vola presented the records of the 2 cut mooring lines, with witness testimony from 2 fishermen who had seen Grevin's men in the cove that night. A Frostwolf skiff captain presented the grounding report from the merchant vessel. Sears and his 2 colleagues reviewed everything with the focused, slightly terrifying attention of people who have spent long careers looking for fraud and have learned to find it. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Sears signed an order removing Rook's authority in Kestrel Cove entirely and directing that warlord Grevin submit to a full examination of his financial relationships with the coastal authority, to be conducted by an independent commissioner from the Crown's administrative service. This last part was what Charles had not expected, and he said so to Sears afterward. "The sandbar tampering is navigational fraud," Sears said. "That is a Crown matter, not just a Cove matter. When a man removes hazard markings to ground ships, he has stopped being merely a corrupt tax official and has become something considerably more serious." He folded his hands. "I sent the Crown notice 2 days ago." Charles thought about Grevin receiving the commissioner's notice and felt something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite relief but lived in the same general territory. "Will he contest it?" Vola asked. "He will try," Sears said. "He has bought influence in the coastal authority. He has not bought the Crown." He looked at them both over his folded hands. "You should be aware that this process will take time. Months, possibly a year. Grevin's financial examination will proceed regardless of whether he cooperates, but during that time he is likely to remain active in the region." "We are aware," Vola said. "And you intend to return to Kestrel Cove?" "Yes," Vola said. "With the war ban," Charles added, and Sears looked at him. "With the war ban," Charles confirmed. 7 skiffs in a cove is not standard, but the situation is not standard. Sears was quiet for a moment. Kestrel Cove has not had a proper protector in years, he said carefully. The previous harbor master left when Grevin began pressuring him. The cove has a fletcher, Charles said. Sears looked at him for a longer moment. And a clan Frostwolf liaison. Permanent posting, Vola said. Sears nodded slowly. That is an unusual arrangement. Yes, said Charles, it is. The return to Kestrel Cove on the 5th day was different from the departure. The salt mark came in from the south in bright mid-morning light, and the cove received them the way a cove receives a familiar ship, the water parting gently, the cliff walls rising around the hull, the smell of salt and stone coming off the rock face in the warmth. The remaining 6 warskiffs were at their berths and the crews were visible, and along the dock the cove's own people, the fishermen, the small merchants, the chandler's staff who had held things together in Felda Wren's absence, were present in the way that people gather when something they have been anxious about is resolving. Felda Wren was back. She had been at her place in the harbor office for 2 days, having been returned from her Frostwolf sea voyage, with what she described privately to Charles as the best notarizing she had done in a decade, and a tin of smoked fish that was extremely good. She was at the dock when the salt mark tied off, and she looked at Charles and at Vola stepping off the gangplank together, and at the mark on Charles's shoulder that showed above his collar when he moved, and she said nothing at all, which for Felda Wren was an extremely eloquent response. Charles went to the cave. It was exactly as he had left it. Dark, cold, banked hearth, unlit lanterns, the 2 chairs exactly where they were. It smelled of cedar and resin and old fire and stone, and he stood at the threshold for a moment and let it be what it was before he changed it again by coming in and being present in it. He lit the lanterns. He rebuilt the hearth fire from the dry wood stacked beside it. He went to the workbench and checked the arrow rack, and the shafts were exactly as he had left them, undisturbed, which meant whoever had searched the cave before their departure had not come back. And this was because Grevin had larger problems now, and the cave was no longer the most important battlefield. He put water on the iron hook over the fire. Vola came in behind him, having supervised the skiff's berthing and given Captain Dara her orders for the watch rotation, and she stopped in the doorway of the cave the way she had on the first morning, that moment of reading it, and then she came in fully, and the cave felt different with her in it in the way that familiar spaces do when someone arrives who belongs in them. She sat in the larger chair, which was her chair now, and Charles brought her a cup with the dried sea herbs, and she wrapped her hands around it and looked at the fire and then at him, and neither of them said anything for a while because the silence was full rather than empty, and there was no reason to do anything with it but be in it. Grevin's examination will take months, she said eventually. I know. He will be cautious during the examination. Crown commissioners make men careful. He will be cautious, Charles agreed, but he is not finished. No, she said, but we are not finished either. He was at the workbench, his hands moving by habit on an unfinished shaft, and he looked across the cave at her in the chair by the fire, her storm blue bodice and her charcoal linen, and the bone pin in her warrior's knot that had gotten the wind in it again during the sea crossing, and her gray eyes that were watching the fire and then watching him. The matriarch, he said. You said you would apply for a permanent posting. I will send the request when the warband repositions next month, she said. It may take 2 months for a response. The matriarch does not hurry. And if she says no, Vola looked at him with the full gray of her eyes, no silver now, no storm, just steady gray. She will not say no, she said. I am the best trade liaison the clan has produced in a generation. She knows that. She will want me where the work is. And the work is here, he said. The work, she said, with the careful precision that meant she was letting something true come through without dressing it, is everywhere I am. But yes, I want to be here. He set down the shaft and came to sit on the edge of the workbench, which was close enough to the chair that they were within easy reach of each other, which was where he had discovered he wanted to be. "The mark has set," she said, and he understood she meant his shoulder. He had looked at it in the summer vein in the morning after in the small mirror above the wash basin, and it was a small, dark crescent, no larger than a coin, on the top of his left shoulder, and it ached pleasantly the way she had said, the way a muscle aches after good work. "It has," he said. She reached out from the chair and touched the shoulder through the shirt lightly, the same reading touch she gave to things she wanted to understand fully. Then she pulled her hand back. "Does it trouble you?" "No," he said. "You have thought about what it means." "You told me what it means," he said. "You are mine, I am yours, both directions." He looked at her. "I did not need more time to think about it. I know what I want." She was quiet for a moment, watching him with the gray eyes. Then she said, "Charles." "Yes. I want you to know," she said, "that what I said on the dock about wanting a light in the cave to come back to, I have been thinking about it for 3 seasons. It was not something I said in the moment. I thought about it every time I came through the cove mouth and timed the docking." She paused. "I want you to know that I am not a woman who changes what she says. When I say I want to stay, I mean to stay." He looked at her for a long moment, and the fire was warm and the cave was full of light from the lanterns on the iron pegs, and outside the sea was moving in its patient rhythm. "I know," he said. "I knew it from the way you said it." He smiled at her. "I am also not a man who changes what he says. I am a fletcher. I work with things that have to be exactly right, and I am very careful about getting them exactly right before I commit to them. I have been careful about everything in my life. And then you walked off a warskiff 3 seasons ago, and I watched you through the cave mouth, and I was not careful about that at all." She stood from the chair and came to where he was sitting on the workbench edge, and she stood in front of him, and he was eye level with her chin, which was where he tended to be with her when he was sitting, and she put her hand on the side of his face. "You are the most careful man I have ever met," she said. "You calculate fletching angles to 4% margins. You crawl through caves with documents pressed to your back. You shoot ledgers out of men's hands with perfect accuracy, and then deny it was significant." Her thumb moved across his cheekbone. "Everything you do is careful and precise and intentional. And you looked at me through a cave mouth for 3 seasons without saying anything because it was too significant to be careless with." She paused. "That is not a man being afraid. That is a man who knows that some things deserve to be right." He caught her hand against his cheek and held it there. "And is this right?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and the certainty in it was absolute and clean, the certainty of a calculation that has been checked and checked again and comes out the same every time. "Yes," he said, and turned his face to press his lips to her palm. She made a soft sound. He stood up from the workbench, which meant he was standing and she was standing, and the height difference was very present but entirely irrelevant. And she pulled him in by the collar in the way she had discovered was effective, and kissed him with the full and deliberate attention of a woman who has made up her mind completely. And he kissed her back with the full and deliberate attention of a man who has always done things precisely when he finally decides to do them. And the fire was warm behind them, and the sea moved outside, and the lanterns burned on the iron pegs. The night that followed was warm and private and long and genuinely good, and it was not a thing that needed recounting in detail, because it was exactly what it was. 2 people who had decided, learning the full weight of what they had decided, and finding that the weight was entirely bearable and in fact a great deal better than bearable, and the cave was the right place for it. The right light and the right smell and the right sound from outside, and the morning came in gold from the cave mouth, and they were both there in it. Greven's examination took 4 months. In those 4 months, Charles and Vola held the cove. The warband settled into a rotation, 4 skiffs at any time, the others ranging the coast for their normal resupply work, Captain Dara rotating in and out with her comfortable scar and her cheerful disapproval of any arrangement that was not nautically optimal. Rook did not return. 2 of Greven's men appeared once at the clifftop lane and looked down at the cove for a long time and then left, and nobody in the cove went up to ask them why. Charles made arrows. He made them for the Frostwolf warband at the standard fletching angle, all 4% of it corrected, which Dara tested in a targeting session on the South Headland and pronounced excellent, which from Dara was lavish praise. He made them for the fishing boat captains who needed bolts for the occasional necessity. He did not make them for Greven's men, who had stopped ordering. Vola ran the trade liaison work and the Cove's informal administration, which was a thing that had happened gradually rather than formally. The Cove's ordinary people coming to the cave workshop for various practical matters, and finding that the woman in the storm blue bodice had good answers and kept her word, and that she was not what they had expected, those of them who had expected anything from an orc woman at all. There was one afternoon in the second month when a fisherman named Petter came to the cave with a complaint that had nothing to do with Greven or the Frostwolves, a property dispute with his neighbor over a mooring post, and he told the story to Charles and Vola with equal parts belligerence and embarrassment. And Vola resolved it in 12 minutes with a logic so clear and equitable that Petter went away satisfied, which was not the state in which people usually left property disputes. And Charles watched her handle it from the workbench and thought that the Cove was doing something it had not done in a long time, which was functioning properly. He told her this that evening. She considered it. "I am a trade liaison," she said. "You are keeping an entire cove running," he said. "Coves require maintenance," she said. "People require the same things coves require: fair terms, clear channels, protection from what damages them. You are very good at it." She looked at him from the larger chair. "You are trying to give me a compliment. I am trying to tell you something true. The same thing from you." "Yes," he admitted. She smiled. "Fletcher." "Yes. You are very good at arrows," she said. "And also at picking locks. And at crawling through caves and negotiating with adjudicators and thinking 4 steps ahead of warlords, and at knowing when to speak and when to sit with your shoulder touching mine." She paused. "And at keeping a good fire." "That is a comprehensive inventory," he said. "I am a thorough woman." The Crown Commissioner arrived in the 4th month and stayed for 3 weeks, and departed with 12 crates of documents, and a preliminary finding that Warlord Greven had engaged in systematic financial manipulation of the coastal authority over a period of 7 years, involving the corruption of 5 officials, the fraudulent assessment of 14 levies across 9 coves and harbor towns, and the deliberate alteration of navigational charts in 3 locations. The preliminary finding was delivered to Sears and his colleagues, who issued a formal order suspending Greven's military authority in the coastal region, pending the full examination. Rook, who had read the direction of events accurately, had by this point moved to a different region entirely, which was the kind of retirement that corrupt officials achieve when they are clever enough to see it coming. Greven contested the suspension. It was a paper contest, done through lawyers in a city 2 weeks' journey north, and it would take another year to resolve fully, but the practical effect in the coastal region was immediate. His men left the Cliff Road checkpoints, because men stop manning checkpoints when the authority behind them has been formally suspended, and the Cliff Road opened. On the morning the last checkpoint closed, Charles went up the cliff steps to the headland and stood at the top and looked north along the road, and the road was empty, and the sea was below him on one side and the inland plateau on the other, and it was an ordinary road again rather than a boundary. He came back down and told Vola, who received the information in the way she received information she had anticipated, with a brief quiet and then a practical question about resupply logistics. "Can the Gull Notch notary resume handling the Frostwolf bond transfers?" she asked. "Or is his relationship with Greven going to be a problem?" "His relationship with Greven has been a problem since month 2 of the examination," Charles said. "He has been very cooperative with the commissioner. He is going to be fine." "Good," she made a note in her ledger. "I need to reconfigure 3 shipping routes. The Cliff Road being open changes the timing significantly." "While you do that," he said, "I am going to go get the defective arrow stock from the secondary cave." She looked up. "Why?" "Because I am going to correct the fletching and resell them," he said. "They are perfectly good arrows except for 4%. She laughed and went back to her ledger, and he went to the secondary cave. He was in the passage between the main cave and the secondary chamber when he heard the sound from the main cave entrance. And the sound was not any of the cove's ordinary sounds, but something specific. A woman's voice, older, carrying the accent of a place east of the thorn wall, speaking to Vola in the orc tongue at a volume that suggested comfort and familiarity. He came back through the passage and stood at the edge of the main cave. Grandmother Setti was seated in the chair that was Vola's chair, which was the larger one, and she had taken it without hesitation the way that very confident elderly people take chairs, as though the designation of any chair is provisional until they have weighed in. She was small and angular and wrapped in a traveling cloak of gray wool, and her white hair was plaited and pinned, and her right hand had the 2 missing fingers and a great many rings on the remaining ones, and her eyes were dark and quick, and were currently performing a comprehensive examination of Charles Dalton that he was not certain he could pass. Vola was standing beside the workbench with her arms folded and the expression of someone who is simultaneously pleased to see a person and deeply resigned to the consequences of that person's presence. "Grandmother Setti," Charles said. "Fletcher," the old woman said. Her common tongue was excellent with the accent that turned certain words into something slightly musical. "I see she bit you." Charles touched his shoulder. "Yes." "Good," said Grandmother Setti. "I was right about you." "She usually is," Vola said, with the layered exasperation of a very old familiarity. "I am always right," Setti said serenely. "It is my primary characteristic." She looked from Charles to Vola and back. "You know that the mate mark requires a formal acknowledgement to the clan." "We know," Vola said. "The matriarch has approved the permanent posting," Setti said, and produced a letter from inside the gray cloak and set it on the workbench with the satisfaction of someone who has been carrying good news and has chosen the exact right moment to produce it. Vola looked at the letter. She looked at Charles. Something in her face did the thing it did when something that mattered came through the door without drama, the quiet adjustment of a woman who has been managing against probabilities and is now allowed to set that management down. "How long ago?" Vola said, with careful precision. "The matriarch signed it 6 weeks ago," Setti said. "I have been delivering it in my own time." 6 weeks, Vola said. "I wanted to see the examination settled first," Setti said. "I also wanted to meet the Fletcher in person before I handed over the formal posting." She was looking at Charles again with those quick dark eyes. "I put a shirt in a market stall. He wore it across the cliff road with your documents against his back and came home with the counterorder tucked inside his apron. I believe I made a good choice." "You made a lucky one," Vola said. "There is no such thing," Setti said firmly. "There is only seeing what is in front of you and moving before the opportunity closes." She looked at Charles. "She watched your cave mouth for 3 seasons. I watched her watching it. You made it easy by wearing the colors of someone who was already looking." "I thought they were nice colors," Charles said. Setti made a sound that was not quite a laugh and was the ancestor of several laughs. "Yes. You also thought the shirt was warm. You also thought the fletching adjustment was a small thing. You are a man who does the correct thing for practical reasons and does not always know that the correct thing is something larger." She folded her hands in the gray cloak. "That is a quality I look for. It means the intentions are real, not performed." Charles was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," he said, "for the shirt." Setti looked at him steadily. "Thank her," she said. "I only put it where she would have to find it. She did everything else." She stayed 2 days, during which she ate a remarkable amount of the smoked fish Felderen had shared, reorganized Vola's ledgers in a manner that Vola said was infuriating and correct simultaneously, inspected the arrow racks with the attention of someone who had been assessing craftsmanship for 80 years, and told Charles 3 stories about Vola's childhood that Vola disputed entirely and that Charles believed completely. On the morning of the 3rd day, Setti packed her traveling cloak and went down to the dock where a Frostwolf transport was waiting, and she embraced Vola with the brief fierce grip of someone who does not do sentiment often and does it completely when she does, and then she turned to Charles. "Come here," she said, which was not a request. He came. She put her ringed hands on either side of his face and looked at him with the quick dark eyes for a long moment. "You are a decent man," she said. In a decent man's life, the best thing that happens is being chosen by someone magnificent and knowing it and staying. She released his face. "Do not be an idiot about staying." "I will not be," he said. "Good," said Setti, and walked down the gangplank and onto the transport and did not look back, because she was not, as she had said, sentimental once the work was done. The skiff pulled away from the dock and headed for the cove mouth, and Charles and Vola stood on the dock watching it go. "She told me," Vola said, 3 months after I started this posting, that she had identified a likely match for me in Kestrel Cove. "She told you in advance," Charles said. "She told me there was a fletcher who made excellent arrows and had kind eyes, and who looked up from his bench when I walked past in a way she found promising." Vola was watching the skiff clear the cove mouth. "I told her I did not have time for a matchmaking project, and she went ahead anyway," Charles said. "She always does," Vola said. "I have spent 26 years being deeply exasperated by this and profoundly grateful for it." He turned to look at her profile against the cove water and the morning sky. "Are you grateful now?" She turned to look at him. "I am," she said, "more than I have been grateful for most things." She paused. "That is also not a thing I say carelessly." He took her hand, her fingers wrapped around his, warm and firm and immediate. "I know," he said. The cove moved around them in its ordinary morning business. Boats going out and coming in, the sound of work and water, and the calls of the people who made their living at the intersection of those two things. The 7 Frostwolf skiffs had reduced to 4 on the standard rotation, and the cliff road was open, and the harbor office was running properly under Felderen, and the south berth was clear and functioning, and the cave at the base of the cliff had a light in it, and a fire on the hearth and 2 chairs, and a workbench full of excellent arrows. Months passed in the honest way that months do when the main work is living rather than surviving. The Greven case resolved slowly and thoroughly, the way that Crown investigations do when they are done by people who are good at their work. By the time the full examination concluded, 14 months after the Crown Commissioner's arrival, Greven had been stripped of his coastal authority title, fined to the edge of his estate, and removed to a supervised land holding 3 days' journey inland from any coast, which was the administrative equivalent of telling a man that his relationship with the sea was over. 2 of the bought adjudicators resigned. The others were examined and cleared. Sears was appointed senior adjudicator for the coastal district, a promotion he received with the expression of a man who had been expecting to earn it for 20 years, and was relieved to have it before he was too old to use it. Rook was never found. Sears opined that he was in a city with no coastal access and a different name, which was the most comfortable outcome for everyone. Kestrel Cove expanded slightly in the 14 months, which is what coves do when the conditions become less oppressive. 2 new trade families established berths. The chandler's shop that Greven had taken was returned to its original owner's family by the commissioner's order. The harbor office added a deputy. Charles's workshop was the same. He had not expanded it, because the cave was exactly the size he needed, and the size he had shaped his life to fit, and the particular rightness of the space was something he had no desire to alter. He added one thing, on the 4th month of the first year, which was a second iron hook above the hearth for a second lantern, so that there were 2 lights rather than one when he came in from the cave mouth in the evening, and the 2 together made the cave warmer to look at from the dock. Vola noticed the second lantern on the evening he hung it, and she looked at it for a moment and then looked at him. 2, she said. 1 for each of us, he said. She was quiet for long enough that he thought he might have gotten the symbolism wrong, and then she crossed to him in 4 strides and kissed him with the full, deliberate warmth of a woman who has understood exactly what was meant, and wants to be precise about her response. The formal acknowledgement to Clan Frostwolf came in the form of a ceremony conducted via Grandmother Setti's correspondence, which was a ceremony in the sense that Setti wrote 3 letters, received 3 responses, and declared the matter handled. The matriarch's formal acknowledgement was brief and specific, noting that the mate mark had been given in accordance with custom, that the match was recorded in the clan records, and that the permanent posting at Kestrel Cove was formally designated as a clan liaison position with full clan support. It was a very practical document. It was exactly what Setti would have arranged. Charles read it at the workbench and turned it over in his hands, the way he turned an arrow to check its straightness, and the letter was very straight. He set it on the shelf above the bench where he kept the things that mattered. It was a morning in the 15th month, the spring of the 2nd year at the cove together, that the adventure began again in the way that adventures do, inconveniently and all at once. The ship came into the cove flying a flag that Charles did not recognize, a deep red with a horizontal black stripe, and it was not a trading ship or a fishing vessel, but a courier-class sloop with 4 oarsmen, and a man at the bow who was standing rather than sitting, which was how messengers from the Crown service stood when they were carrying formal notices. Vola saw it from the dock and came to the cave mouth. "Crown courier," she said. "I see it," Charles said, setting down the arrow he was working on. "The Greven matter is finished," she said. "This is something else." It was something else. The courier carried a notice from the Crown's coastal office requesting the presence of the Kestrel Cove liaison, which was how Vola was formally registered at a conference in Somervane, regarding the establishment of a new regional trade protocol for the Orc clan routes along the northern coast. The conference was to take place in 3 weeks, and would involve representatives from 4 clans and the coastal authority, and 2 Crown trade commissioners. "They want Frostwolf at the table," Vola said, reading the notice in the cave with the morning light coming in through the entrance. "They want you specifically," Charles said, reading over her shoulder. "It says the Kestrel Cove liaison. That is the permanent posting. That is you." "It is a significant meeting," she said. "It is a very significant meeting," he agreed. "If the northern coast routes are formalized through the Crown's protocol, it changes what every Orc clan can access and on what terms." "I need to prepare," she said, and her mind was already on it. He could see it in the way her eyes went internal and organizing, the specific look of a woman with a large and complex thing to arrange. "You need Captain Dara's fastest skiff and 2 weeks of preparation," he said, "and I am coming with you." She looked at him and the organizing look paused. "You have a workshop." "I have Petter," he said, and this was true. Petter's son was 19 and had developed an interest in fletching, and Charles had been teaching him for 4 months, and the boy was good enough to mind the rack and fill simple orders for 2 weeks. "And I have a bow. And I have excellent handwriting which I understand is useful in meetings with commissioners." "It is," she said. "And I have contacts in Somervane," he said. "Adjudicator Sears, the harbor office deputy who owes me a favorable berth report for last quarter's arrow delivery." He paused. "And you will be at a table where the other 4 Orc clans are going to be watching the Frostwolf liaison and forming opinions, and I am Frostwolf marked and I wear the colors and I think it is better for everyone if I am there." She looked at him for a long moment. "You want to come because you do not want me to do it alone," she said. Not an accusation, an observation, exact and warm. "Yes," he said. "You have been managing alone your whole life," she said. "I was managing," he said. "There is a difference between managing and wanting." He held her gaze. "You said that actually on the first day." The corner of her mouth lifted. "I did. I do not want you to manage alone either," he said. "That is also both directions." She reached out and took his hand with the firm, warm grip that was hers, entirely specific, immediately recognizable, the grip that had closed over his on the dock post-morning when they made their first deal and had never quite fully loosened since. "Pack light," she said. "Dara does not like unnecessary cargo." "I will bring arrows," he said. They are never unnecessary, she laughed. He packed. They left on the salt mark on the morning tide, and the cove sent them off in the way that a cove sends off people who have become part of its rhythm, without ceremony and with the implicit understanding that they would be back, which was the most genuine form of trust a place could offer. Petter's son was at the cave mouth with a shy wave, and Felder Wren called something from the dock that was mostly lost to the wind, and Captain Dara had already set the sail and was pointedly not watching any of this. Charles stood at the bow as the salt mark moved out through the cove mouth, and the cliff walls opened on either side and the sea opened ahead, and the morning sun was on the water and the colors were blue and silver and gold, which were not Frostwolf colors but were close. Vola came to stand beside him, her shoulder against his, and the cove shrank behind them as the sea grew. "What do you think the conference will be?" she asked, watching the horizon. "Complicated," he said. "With 4 clans and 2 commissioners, and whatever the Crown's actual agenda is, which is never quite what the stated agenda is. The stated agenda is trade protocol. Actual agenda is probably a mechanism to bring orc trade routes under Crown licensing without appearing to take orc trade routes under Crown licensing," he said, "which is a thing that has been attempted before, and failed before," she said, "and will fail again if the Frostwolf liaison is paying attention." She looked at him. The gray eyes were silver in the morning light and her hair was in the warrior's knot and the wind was already at it. "I am always paying attention," she said. "I know," he said. "I am saying it because I want to say it. I want to say that you are going to walk into that room and they are going to think what people often think when they see you for the first time, and then you are going to speak, and they are going to revise." She was looking at him in the particular way she had, the full reading of him. "What do people often think when they see me for the first time?" He turned to look at her fully. The height of her and the gray eyes and the storm blue bodice over the charcoal linen and the bone pin in her hair, and the tusks and the green-gray of her in the morning light, which was not beauty as painters generally practiced it, but was beauty as the sea practiced it, large and specific and entirely itself. "That she is formidable," he said, "which is correct. They just think that is the whole of it." She held his gaze. "And what is the rest of it?" "That she is warm," he said simply, "and honest, and funnier than she intends to appear, and that she makes decisions as though they are permanent because she means them to be, and that she watches cave mouths for 3 seasons before she says anything because some things deserve to be right." He looked at the horizon. "The room will know it by the end of the first session." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Charles, yes, you are the only person," she said carefully and precisely, "who has ever made me want to be seen." He looked at her. The ship moved under them and the sea went on around them in every direction, and the sky was very large and very blue. "Good," he said. He took her hand at the bow of the salt mark, and she let him, and they stood together facing the horizon as the cove disappeared behind them and Summervane waited ahead, and the sea was full of morning, and the colors were blue and silver, and the particular gold of early light on water, and the salt mark drove through the swells with its usual purposeful surge, and there was a great deal ahead of them, and they were going toward it together, which was the only way either of them had ever wanted to go anywhere at all. The storm blue shirt had faded slightly, as shirts do with wear and sea air and months of real use. The silver knotwork at the cuff had not faded. It was precise and deliberate and permanent, the way certain things are once they have been correctly made. The truest arrows, the clearest evidence, the deepest decisions. The kind of thing that, once set, stays set. Vola looked down at the cuff on his wrist, the one she had turned over in her hand on that first dock post morning, reading the pattern. "Still wearing my colors," she said. "Always," said Charles Dalton. She smiled the full smile, the one she had given up covering, and the sea took them forward, and the story went on in all the ways that stories do when the ending is not a stopping but a direction, both of them moving through it together with their hands joined and the horizon still ahead, unlimited and bright.